There is a quiet moment, if you listen closely enough, when the night sky feels less like a ceiling above you, and more like a memory. A memory not of your life, or of anyone's life you've known, but of everything, the first breath of light, the first ripple of space, the first moment time itself dared to begin. You've lived your entire life inside the echo of that instant. Every sunrise you've ever seen, every clock you've ever watched, every heartbeat in your chest, all of it is part of a story that began in absolute silence, and then bloomed into a universe. Tonight, we are going to drift backward, past the clouds, past the planets, past the galaxies that spin like slow lanterns in the dark. We will go so far back that there are no stars at all, only the smallest whisper of something that will soon become everything. This is not just the story of the universe. It's the story of the first moment, and the day that time began. Before we begin, take a deep breath. Let the day fall away. If you find yourself somewhere between listening and dreaming tonight, that's exactly where you're meant to be. If this journey feels like one worth sharing, I invite you to like this video, subscribe, and leave "Where are you from?" in the comments. Tonight, you'll hear no rush, no sharp edges, only the slow unfolding of truth, woven with wonder. We'll walk gently into the oldest story ever told, letting it carry us into a place where science feels like poetry, and time feels like a lullaby. Let's begin, learn the day time began, Big Bang Theory. Chapter 1, The Last Quiet Before Everything. Imagine for a moment the sound of your own breathing. Not the noise itself, but the awareness of it. The way each inhale feels like a tide rising, and each exhale like the tide's slow retreat. Now, picture that rhythm falling away, like the hush after a final note of music fades. The quiet deepens until it no longer feels like silence at all, but something older, something that existed before any ear could listen. We begin here, in that deep and impossible quiet, the kind of quiet that does not exist anywhere in your daily life, not in a room at night, not in the wilderness beneath the stars, not even in the spaces between your thoughts. This is not the silence of absence. It is the silence before existence itself. The clocks have stopped, though in truth they have never started. There is no tick to follow a tock. There is no second to hold in your hand, because there is no time yet for a second to belong to. There is no space to measure, no distance to cross, and yet, here in this impossible state, all that will ever be is contained. Physicists call it a singularity, but even that name is a pale shadow of what it truly is. Words falter in this place. Every metaphor we might try to paint with is stolen from a universe that does not yet exist. To call it small is wrong, because there is no space for smallness to mean anything. To call it hot is incomplete, because heat as we know it comes from particles in motion, and here those particles are not yet born. Still, we try to imagine. Perhaps it is like a pearl, impossibly bright and impossibly heavy, pressed into a point too tiny to see. A point where density is infinite, where every galaxy, every star, every atom that will ever form is folded together like pages of a book pressed closed, or perhaps it is like a breath, held so long that it becomes all there is, a breath that has yet to be released, but holds within it the first winds that will sweep across every planet that will ever turn in the dark. But even these images are clumsy, for in truth, there is no here or there. There is no inside. The singularity, because there is no outside for it to be inside of. There is only it and nothing else. If you could exist here, and of course, you could not, you would find no way to tell where you are. You would have no eyes to see, no light to catch, no skin to feel warmth or cold. You would not even have the comfort of darkness, because darkness requires space to stretch across. And here, there is none. There is only potential. Think of a seed, small enough to balance on the tip of your finger, and yet containing within it the shape of a tree that may one day reach higher than a house. Now imagine that seed contains not just one tree, but an entire forest, every leaf, every root, every bird's nest, every gust of wind that will pass through its branches. That is the singularity. It is the seed of reality itself, and it waits. Though waiting is not the right word. Waiting belongs to time, and time does not yet exist. Instead, it is timeless, still, complete. But if you could somehow press your awareness into this state, you might feel something that resembles pressure. The immense tension of everything that will ever exist compressed into one indivisible point. A coil wound tighter than tightness itself. We cannot see it directly. The laws of physics as we know them collapse under its weight. General relativity, which describes how space bends and time flows, gives way to infinities that make no sense. Quantum mechanics, which governs the realm of the very small, cannot yet speak the language of the infinite. In this place, the two great pillars of modern physics stare at each other across an unbridgeable gap. And yet, even without the full map, we can trace the ripples that will come from this moment. Like standing at the edge of a still pond, knowing that the smallest touch will send waves across its surface. We can feel, in some abstract way, the inevitability of change. Somewhere in this pressure lies the future. The mountains and valleys of distant planets, the currents of oceans yet to be born, the rise and fall of civilizations, the pulse of a newborn heart, the spark of an idea that will change the course of history. It is all here, folded in upon itself, waiting for the first movement. We might be tempted to call this before the beginning, but before is a word made of time, and time has no meaning here. This is not the prologue to the story. It is the space between breaths, the still point around which all motion will soon spin. Close your eyes. Imagine the world's most perfect balance, a scale so exact that neither side moves, not even by the width of an atom. That is the universe now. No imbalance, no preference for one direction over another. Every possibility is equal, held in an eternal pause. And then, in a way we cannot fully explain, something changes. Some theories suggest it is a quantum fluctuation, a tiny, spontaneous imbalance in the perfect symmetry. Others hint that our universe is but one bubble in a vast, unseeable multiverse, and that this bubble began to swell. Some believe there was no cause at all, that the universe simply began because it could. Whatever the truth, that change, that first tilt, will become everything. But in this instant, just before that shift, we are still wrapped in the last. Quiet before everything. The silence here is not empty. It is full to bursting. You might imagine it as a note held by an orchestra, the players poised to release a melody that will last for billions of years. If there were light, it would be too bright to see. If there was sound, it would be beyond hearing. And yet there is nothing for the light to shine on, nothing for the sound to travel through. The universe is still folded shut, like a letter waiting to be read. Even the concepts of past and future have no foothold here. In our human lives, we move forward through time as though walking down a path. But here, there is no path. There is only the whole forest, seen all at once, with no beginning and no end, a perfect, timeless totality. It is strange, isn't it, to realize that the most important moment in the history of everything is also the most unknowable. We can chart the paths of galaxies and measure the faint echoes of their birth, but we cannot stand in the singularity and point to the reason it began. The origin is both the most intimate and the most unreachable truth we have. Perhaps this is why the ancient myths of so many cultures speak of beginnings wrapped in mystery, of creation from nothing, of light bursting forth from darkness, of cosmic eggs and sacred breaths. They are all poetic attempts to touch something we cannot hold, and yet, in our own quiet way, we can sit with it. We can close our eyes and feel the weight of what is to come. We can let our minds drift to the edges of thought, where science and wonder meet. Somewhere ahead, though ahead is still meaningless, here there will be light. There will be space to move through. There will be time to count. There will be stars that burn for billions of years, and planets that circle them in quiet arcs. There will be dust that drifts between them, carrying the building blocks of life. There will be oceans that breathe with tides, forests that sway with wind, and skies that change with seasons. But not yet. For now, there is only this, the last. Quiet before everything. And in that quiet, all of reality waits, not for permission, not for readiness, but for the single ineffable moment when it will begin. And when it does, everything will change forever. Chapter 2: The Breath That Shattered Silence. The quiet holds for one last, immeasurable moment. Not a moment in the way we know it, for there is still no time to measure, no seconds to count, but something shifts. The perfect symmetry, so impossibly balanced, leans. And when it leans, it does not stumble. It blooms, in less than the smallest fraction of a second, a fraction so small that if you tried to write it, your pen would run out of ink before you finished the zeros. The universe begins to expand, not outward into space, but as space. There is no outside to rush into. Space is being woven in real time, or rather, the first version of time, as the expansion unfolds. We call this the Big Bang, but bang is misleading. It suggests an explosion with noise and chaos, shrapnel flying through air. This is not that. This is a swelling, a stretching, a breath so deep that it will take billions of years to finish exhaled. In the first instant, smaller than 1/trillionth of a trillionth of a trillionth of a second, something extraordinary happens. Inflation. Space itself expands faster than light, not because anything moves faster than light, but because the very fabric that light travels through is stretching. The scale of the universe grows from smaller than a proton to larger than a galaxy, all before you could blink. And in that instant, the seeds of the future are sown. Tiny fluctuations, wrinkles in the fabric of density, are amplified. These imperfections will one day become the skeleton of the cosmos. Galaxies will form where space was just slightly denser, leaving great voids where it was slightly thinner. Without these wrinkles, the universe would remain a bland, featureless soup. The expansion slows, but it does not stop. The temperature, once beyond comprehension, begins to cool, though cool is relative. In the first millionth of a second, the universe is still hotter than the core of any star that will ever exist. Energy condenses into particles, quarks and antiquarks, the smallest known building blocks of matter. They appear in pairs, mirror images of one another. and almost as quickly as they appear, they annihilate in flashes of pure energy, but not perfectly, for reasons we still do not fully understand. There is a tiny imbalance. For every billion pairs, there is one extra quark without a partner. That small leftover, that imperfection, will become the matter of the universe. Every star, every planet, every living thing owes its existence to that 1 in a billion accident. The newborn quarks join in threes to form protons and neutrons, the nuclei of atoms. This is the first architecture of matter, the first structures to exist in a universe that moments ago had no structure at all. It is now 1 second old. In that single second, the laws of physics as we know them have emerged. Gravity, electromagnetism, and the strong and weak nuclear forces. These 4 invisible hands will shape everything from the fall of an apple to the orbit of galaxies by the end of the first 3 minutes. The universe has cooled enough for protons and neutrons to bind. Together, the first nuclei form minus hydrogen, helium, and a trace of lithium. This moment is called nucleosynthesis. It is the universe's first act of chemistry, though it will be hundreds of thousands of years before electrons join these nuclei to make complete atoms. The young cosmos is still opaque, filled with a dense, hot fog of particles and radiation. Light cannot travel freely. It ricochets from particle to particle, trapped in an endless game of cosmic pinball. If you could somehow look at the universe now, you would not see the familiar black velvet of space dotted with stars. You would see only a blinding brightness, a sea of energy so intense it erases all shapes. And yet, even in this blinding chaos, order is unfolding. The energy density continues to drop as the expansion carries on. Gravity begins to tug on the tiny variations seeded during inflation, pulling matter together in some regions while letting other regions thin out. The great web of cosmic structure is already beginning to take shape, invisible now, but inevitable somewhere in this haze. Neutrinos, nearly massless particles that barely interact with anything, decouple from matter and stream outward. They will travel almost entirely unimpeded for the rest of cosmic history. Billions of years later, we will learn to detect these ghostly travelers, and they will tell us stories from the universe's first seconds. Time, in the human sense, has begun. There is a past now and a future. The universe is not static. It has a direction at around 380,000 years old. Something remarkable will happen, but we are not there yet. For now, the fog remains. The light is captive, and the young atom stubi are still just charged nuclei and free electrons. In the meantime, the expansion continues its gentle stretch. The temperature drops from trillions of degrees to mere billions, then to millions. Still unimaginably hot, but cool enough that the violence of the earliest seconds is beginning to subside. If you were somehow able to drift here without being destroyed, you would feel the universe not as empty space, but as a thick, glowing fluid. The heat would sear beyond comprehension, the density crushing, but you would also sense the rhythm and outward breathing, a slow but unstoppable release. This breath is not like ours, in and out. It is all out, a single exhale, begun here, that will last for eternity, and with each passing moment, that breath carries the seeds of the familiar. Hydrogen will one day fuse into helium in the hearts of stars, releasing light that will warm worlds. Helium will fuse into carbon, into oxygen, into iron, the elements that will become water and rock, trees and skin, blood and bone. All of it began here. In this luminous fog, in the first breath after silence. If you were to press your mind against the edge of imagination, you might see it, not as a fireball, but as a deepening ocean of light and matter, expanding in all directions, not rushing into a void, but stretching the void itself into being. And if you could listen, though there is no air for sound, you would hear the vibration of space itself, the ancient hum of the newborn universe. Those vibrations will leave faint ripples that we will one day detect as gravitational waves, whispers from the first moments of time. Somewhere far ahead in this unfolding story, there will be galaxies, and within them stars, and around some of those stars, planets. On one of those planets, life will rise from chemistry, will open its eyes, will look back into the night sky and wonder where it came from. And in wondering, it will discover that it came from here, from this breath, the breath that shattered. Silence is still moving through you now. It moves in the space between your atoms, in the warmth of your skin, in the light that reaches your eyes from distant stars. The expansion that began then has never stopped. It carries you forward every moment of your life. We are not just in the universe. We are the universe, still breathing, and the exhale continues forever. Chapter 3: When Light Learned to Travel. It began not as a blaze, but as a whisper, before light had a name, before it could be caught in the net of language. It existed only as a possibility, something that might one day break from the infinite hush and pour itself into space. Time itself had been waiting, stretching its long arms into the void, measuring an eternity of nothing in intervals too subtle for any mind to grasp. And in that immeasurable patience, something stirred. No one saw it, because there was no one to see, no eyes, no senses, not even the idea of an observer. But if there had been a witness, they would have sworn the darkness held its breath, a trembling, a pressure, a shift too delicate to be sound but too real to ignore. It was as though the fabric of nothing had been threaded with anticipation, as though the abyss was bracing for an arrival that even it could not name. And then, not suddenly, not explosively, but with a measured inevitability, light was born. It did not leap, it unfurled. It stretched from a single point, tasting the edges of the new reality, spilling into the void like water released from a sealed vessel. It was thin at first, hesitant, unsure of its own weight. Imagine a river learning how to flow, a bird learning how to fly. That was how light moved in those first moments. The universe was not yet ready to receive it. Space had no shape, no rhythm, no map for the journey light would take. And yet, light traveled. It could not do otherwise. Motion was written into its essence. The moment it existed, it sought the places it had not yet been. The first thing light learned was distance. It discovered that space was not just a backdrop, but an ocean, vast, cold, and silent. It learned that to move was to measure. With every fraction of a heartbeat, it carved lines through emptiness, creating the first paths, the first trajectories. Before light, there had been no here and there, only the indivisible everywhere of darkness. Now there was separation. Now there was direction. Now there was the first concept of a way. At first, light did not know it was fast. In a world without time, speed is meaningless. But when the rhythm of the cosmos began to emerge, when particles found their mass, when the early fabric of reality thickened, light realized it was moving with unmatched swiftness. It was the first traveler, the first messenger, the first thing to bridge the impossible gulfs between what was and what could be. It had no voice, but it sang in its own way, not in sound, but in the language of illumination. Wherever it touched, it revealed. Shadows, once infinite, began to have edges. Darkness learned the art of retreat. The void, once a single, unbroken silence, became a dialogue between absence and presence. Light did not exist alone for long. Matter began to stir in its wake, as if answering its call. Clouds of particles coalesced, tentative and chaotic, swirling in slow spirals under the persuasion of gravity. And light, ever curious, wrapped itself around these newborn shapes, learning how to scatter, how to refract, how to bend. When it struck a cluster of atoms, it shattered into a spectrum, not yet the rainbows of later worlds, but the first. Hints of diversity in its own nature. It discovered that it could be both wave and particle, both endless and fleeting. In one moment, it was a ripple passing effortlessly through space. In the next, it was a singular burst, striking matter like a chisel against stone. It was in this duality that light found its power. To travel was not only to move, but to transform both itself and everything it touched. As eons slipped past, light became the storyteller of the cosmos. Every journey it made, every surface it struck, left behind a record, not in ink or stone, but in the very arrangement of energy. Stars, when they finally began to ignite, became both sources and recipients of its gift. From their burning hearts, light streamed outward in every direction, carrying with it the tales of fusion and fire, of gravity's relentless embrace, of the balance between creation and collapse. In those distant reaches, galaxies began to spin, each one a vast lantern in the endless night. Light became their envoy, crossing unimaginable distances to deliver their images to places that did not yet exist. It traveled without expectation, without knowing that one day, on one small blue planet, fragile eyes would open and see it, and in seeing would begin to understand. But that was far ahead in the story. For now, light was still learning it, learned about patience, for even though it was fast beyond comprehension, the universe was vaster still. Some of its journeys would take billions of years, and many would never end. There were corners of the cosmos so remote that the light sent toward them would wander forever, never reaching anything at all. Yet even in this, light found no despair, for it understood, in some deep way, that its existence was not defined by arrival, but by the act of going. It learned about sacrifice, for not all light survived its travels. Some were swallowed by dust, absorbed by matter, transformed into heat, and lost to the darkness. Some fell into the unyielding jaws of black holes, where time itself bent and broke. But even in loss, there was transformation. Energy, after all, is never truly gone. It simply changes form, begins a new journey. It learned about intimacy, for there were moments when light would linger, trapped in the gravity of a star or a planet, circling endlessly before finding release. It traced the curves of worlds, bathed them in warmth, and gave them the possibility of life long before life arrived to receive it. Light also learned to wait. There were places where it would be caught, hidden away in the cold, dense clouds of interstellar space. It would rest there for thousands, even millions of years, before being freed again by some distant cosmic collision. And when it emerged, it carried with it the memory of stillness, a patience that no living thing could ever fully match. Eventually, light learned something else. It was not eternal. It would fade. The universe itself would one day stretch so wide, so empty, that light's journey would become harder, slower. Wavelengths would lengthen, until they could no longer be seen, no longer be felt. In the farthest reaches of the future, light would become a whisper again, not because it had ceased to be, but because space had carried it so far apart that the chorus of stars would fall silent. But that ending was a truth for another age. For now, the young universe was brightening, and light was everywhere, weaving itself into the newborn structures of reality, teaching space how to shine. There is a kind of poetry in the fact that light travels at a constant speed, no matter how or where it moves. It does not rush for some and crawl for others. It is impartial, unchanging, faithful to its own nature. In this way, it is both humble and absolute, a lesson written into the bones of the cosmos itself. One day, when creatures with minds and questions would gaze up at the night sky, they would measure their universe in the language of light. They would speak of light years and photons, of redshifts and cosmic horizons. They would build their understanding of reality on the paths that light had taken long before they were born. They would use light to look back in time, to peer into the first instance of creation, and to imagine the worlds that might be waiting beyond their sight. And in doing so, they would join the journey, not by traveling themselves, but by letting light carry their awareness farther than their bodies could ever go. Light's first travels were not toward us. We were not even a thought in the mind of the cosmos. And yet, every beam, every wave, every photon that set out in those early days carried within it the possibility of us, the faint, unformed promise that somewhere, someday, there would be beings who could look upon its path and feel awe. And maybe that is the quiet miracle of light. It does not need to know its purpose to fulfill it. It simply moves, endlessly, faithfully, scattering beauty into the dark. For in the beginning, light did not choose to travel. It simply could not bear to stay still. Chapter 4. The First Shapes in the Dark. Before there were shapes, there was only the boundless darkness, not the darkness of absence, but a fullness so complete that it could be mistaken for nothingness. It was the quiet after the first great breath, after the shattering of stillness, after light began its long journey through the newborn expanse. This darkness was not a void, it was a cradle. Inside it, light moved like a timid wanderer feeling its way across unfamiliar ground. It had no path, no map, no boundary to push against. It went outward simply because outward was all there was. Yet even in its infancy, light was restless. It wanted to touch, to discover, to collide. And slowly, as eons passed in the rhythmless measure of cosmic time, collisions began to happen. The first collisions were faint and quiet, photons brushing past dust so small it could not yet be called matter, waves of energy folding into each other, threads of light tangling in the invisible fabric of the young universe. These were accidents at first, without meaning, like letters falling from a hand before they formed a word. But in the deep silence, patterns began to form, and the universe started writing its first sentences. It was here, in this shadowed nursery, that shapes began to emerge. In the earliest moments, after the breath that shattered silence, energy and matter had been inseparable, a blur of heat and motion. But time, even in its unmeasured infancy, is a sculptor. It cools, it slows. It teaches particles how to linger near one another, how to hold hands without slipping away. And so, the smallest unions began, hydrogen embracing hydrogen too. Make the simplest atom, helium joining the dance soon after. They floated freely in the infinite dark, unaware of what they would one day become. But the darkness was patient. It waited for gravity. Gravity had been there from the beginning. A quiet, invisible weaver pulling threads toward each other. It was not loud like light, nor quick like energy. It worked in silence, tugging softly, again and again, until distant particles found themselves drawn together. At first, the gatherings were small, whispers in the vast black sea. But whispers have a way of becoming conversations. Clusters formed, gas pooled. Invisible hands sculpted clouds, larger than entire galaxies to be. And in the quiet of these gatherings, pressure began to build. The darkness could feel it, the way a still room can feel the tension before a storm. Something was going to happen. The first stars were born not in light, but in shadow. Imagine colossal clouds of hydrogen, so vast that their edges were farther apart than light could travel in 1,000 lifetimes. Gravity pulled at them relentlessly, folding them inward. The gas swirled, churned, and squeezed until deep inside the heart of each cloud, the heat became unbearable. Atoms, which until now had been content to drift side by side, were pressed so close that they began to fuse. Fusion was the second great revolution, the moment when matter learned to burn. Hydrogen became helium, and in the act of becoming, it released light not born from the first breath of the universe, but from its own creation. These lights, these first stars, flickered into being like lanterns in the dark, scattered and lonely but brilliant. The universe had its first points of reference, its first coordinates in the infinite black. Shapes were no longer an idea. They were real. From a distance, the early universe must have looked like a velvet ocean dotted with faint embers. But distance itself was strange then, because space was still stretching, still pulling itself apart faster than light could cross. Galaxies would one day hold these stars together, but for now they were just drifting islands of fire in an endless sea. Some stars were massive, giants with lifespans measured in mere millions of years. They lived quickly and died violently, collapsing into themselves before exploding in supernova that lit up their surroundings in flashes brighter than entire galaxies. These explosions scattered heavier elements, carbon, oxygen, iron, into the darkness, seeding it with the raw ingredients for everything that would come after: planets, oceans, life. Other stars were smaller, steadier. They burned slowly, patiently, as though they understood that the work of shaping a universe could not be rushed between the stars. The dark was no longer empty. Shadows moved differently now. They had texture, depth, a geometry shaped by the invisible pull of gravity, and within these shadows, the first great structures began to form. Gravity gathered stars into families, the earliest galaxies. Some were graceful spirals, arms curling like slow-motion whirlpools. Others were chaotic clusters, bound together not by elegance, but by sheer gravitational stubbornness. Each galaxy became a city of light in the dark, its streets and avenues stretching across millions of light years. And yet, even as these shapes emerged, the darkness still ruled. For every pinprick of light, there were vast stretches of space where no star had yet kindled, where only cold gas and dust drifted in silence. The dark was not vanquished. It had simply learned to coexist with light, shaping it, holding it, giving it contrast. From here, the story deepens, because the universe did not just form stars and galaxies. It began to form memory. You see, every shape in the dark carried a record of what came before. The swirling of a galaxy told the story of the gravitational pull that shaped it. The composition of a star whispered of the earlier stars that had died to make its elements. The light from each one carried its history outward, endlessly, in all directions, waiting for someone, something, to receive it at this stage. There were no eyes to see, no minds to remember, but the universe was already a storyteller. Every photon was a message. Every shadow was a pause in the sentence. The darkness, once unbroken, was now a tapestry, but like all tapestries, it was not static. The shapes shifted, collided, merged. Galaxies danced toward one another over billions of years, their stars intermingling like mingled threads. Some merged gently, creating larger, more complex spirals. Others collided violently, sending streams of stars slingshotting into intergalactic space. The dark between them was not passive. Invisible rivers of matter, dark matter, flowed through it, unseen yet essential, guiding the movements of galaxies, like the hidden currents that steer an ocean's tides. Without these unseen structures, the light would have scattered into nothing. The darkness was the frame in which all the shapes could exist, and yet, as intricate as this cosmic architecture had become, it was still only the beginning. From the debris of ancient stars, planets began to form. Dust gathered into rocks, rocks into worlds. Some were scorched, barren spheres, circling too close to their stars. Others were icy exiles, wandering the outer reaches of their systems. A few, a precious few, found themselves in the delicate balance between warmth and cold, where oceans could form and chemistry could become complex. It is tempting to jump ahead here, to speak of life stirring in those oceans, but that would be skipping the long, patient work the universe did before life even had a chance. Before there could be seeds, there had to be soil. Before there could be questions, there had to be shapes. Sometimes I wonder if the darkness knew what it was doing. Was there intention behind the way it let light travel, the way it allowed gravity to gather, the way it gave stars both the space to burn and the inevitability to die? Or was it all the slow unfolding of rules set in motion by the first breath, rules that did not need purpose, only time? In either case, the result was the same. From formlessness came form. From silence came structure. The darkness gave way. Two shapes, and those shapes began to define the universe. Billions of years after the first star lit up the black, its light might still be traveling, a message in a bottle, crossing an ocean of time. Somewhere, it may still be passing through untouched regions of space, brushing against nothing, unnoticed, unreceived. And yet, that light exists. It is real. It is part of the great, unbroken conversation between darkness and illumination. We, much later, would look up at the night sky and see these points of light as stars, constellations, stories. But here, in this chapter of the universe, there were no names, no mythologies, only the shapes themselves, new and unburdened by interpretation. If the first breath was the moment the universe began to speak, and the journey of light was its first word, then these shapes in the dark were its first sentences. They were not yet a language, but they hinted at one, a grammar of gravity, a vocabulary of light, a syntax of space and time. And just as language shapes thought, these cosmic structures would shape everything that came after. The paths planets could take, the environments in which life could arise, the histories that civilizations would one day record in their own words. The darkness, once whole and undisturbed, had allowed itself to be broken, and in being broken, it became something greater. Shapes were still forming. The story was still writing itself. And the darkness, though changed, still watched over it all. A silent witness to the universe, learning how to take form, because this was not the end of creation. It was only the first sketch. Chapter 5: The Echo That Never Ends. It is said that an echo is never truly gone. It fades, yes, but fading is not the same as ending. It drifts outward, slipping past the reach of our ears, and we, small creatures, bound to fragile bodies, mistake its distance for its death. But the universe knows better. It remembers. It holds on to every tremor, every ripple, every fragment of sound that has ever been born. Long before there were mouths to speak, or ears to hear, there was an echo. Not the echo of a voice, nor the echo of a footstep against stone, but the first repetition of the first sound that ever tore through the fabric of silence. That sound, that breath that broke the stillness, had never meant to linger. It was an accident, a spark leaping from the collision of forces too vast to name. And yet, in the way of all things unplanned, it became the seed of something endless. The echo began as a shiver in the dark, a gentle recoil from the violence of birth. The newborn universe had no walls to catch it, no canyon to send it spiraling back. Instead, it traveled outward into a space that was not yet space, a reach without edge. With every heartbeat of that new reality, it stretched farther. It did not know it was stretching. It simply moved because movement was all it could do. In that movement, there was both purpose and accident. The echo found itself tangled in waves of light, woven into the long threads of energy that had begun to weave the cosmic fabric. Everywhere light went, the echo followed, and everywhere the echo went, it left a memory behind. A strange thing happens when you move forever in a place without end. You begin to touch everything, even things that do not yet exist. You brush against the shadows of worlds still waiting to be born, slip through the skeletons of galaxies that have not yet gathered their stars. The echo learned this without meaning to learn. It was never a thinking thing, and yet it carried something like memory, something like intention. It learned that to pass through a place was to leave a trace behind, and so, even in its absence, it was still there. Millions of years passed. Not that years meant anything yet, and the echo found itself scattered into pieces. One fragment wrapped itself around the slow birth of gravity. Another dissolved into the background radiation that would one day be the hum of the universe. One fragment waited, silent and patient, at the edge of a forming galaxy. It clung to the swirl of stars, whispering to the dust as if dust could listen. Perhaps, in a way, it could dot another fragment slipped deep into the cold, where light dared not wander. It curled itself in the folds of darkness, waiting for the day something or someone might wander close enough to disturb it. What is an echo without an origin? A question, maybe, or perhaps an answer waiting for a mouth to speak it aloud. By the time the first worlds had cooled enough to grow oceans, the echo had already touched them. It had already bent itself into the patterns of wind and wave. It had already disguised itself in the crash of water against rock, in the low hum of tides pulling themselves toward the moon. The creatures who would one day walk those worlds would hear these sounds and think them natural, and they would be right. But they would not know that buried in those sounds was the voice of the universe's first breath, repeated and repeated until it became something else entirely. On one such world, long before it was called by any name, the echo threaded itself into the wind. It learned the shape of mountains, the patience of rivers, the slow erasure of stone by time. When storms rolled in, it rose with the thunder. When night fell, it sank into the song of crickets and the rustle of unseen leaves. It never announced itself. It never said, "I am the beginning, I am the first sound." It simply became part of the endless conversation between world and sky. The echo had no voice of its own, only the voices it borrowed. But in those borrowed voices, it began to find meaning. It began to understand that repetition was a kind of survival. If it could keep being heard, even in fragments, then it would never truly die. So it wove itself into music before music had a name. It bent itself into the notes of rain tapping against hollow wood, into the percussion of footsteps on dry earth, into the first human attempt to shape breath into song. And when those early songs rose toward the stars, the echo recognized them. They were kin, not because they sounded the same, but because they carried the same desire, to be remembered. The echo followed humanity quietly. It hid in lullabies, in the whispered prayers of the desperate, in the unsteady laughter shared between lovers in the dark. It was there in the shouts of joy and in the cries of grief. It was there in the long, wordless silences that spoke louder than any sentence could. Every time a sound was made, the echo was given a new path to travel. It became 1,000 echoes inside 1,000 lives, each carrying a fragment of the first. Even now, it moves. Even now, as you read these words, it is brushing past you through the hum of your routines, through the faint whisper of your own breath. You will not hear it, not in the way you hear a voice calling your name, but perhaps you will feel it, the way one feels the weight of memory without remembering the details. Perhaps you will sense that you have always been living inside the continuation of something that began long before you. And maybe that is what the universe has been trying to tell us all along, that nothing ever truly ends. It only changes form. The first sound became the first echo, and the first echo became every sound that followed. It is not gone, it never was. It is only moving farther, fainter, until the day it finds something or someone to send it back again. When that day comes, you might not even realize that the voice you are hearing is older than stars. You might think it is your own thought, your own memory, but somewhere deep inside, some unspoken part of you will know, this is the echo that never ends, and you will answer it without knowing why. And in your answer, it will live again. Before there was time, there was only silence. A stillness so perfect, it had no beginning and no end. And then, a spark, the first breath of light, the first heartbeat of the universe. It wasn't just the birth of matter or space. It was the birth of time itself. Every second you have ever lived, every moment you have ever loved, every tear, every laugh, every sunrise, all of them trace their roots back to that instant, the day time began, the day the universe chose to move forward and never look back. And now, as you drift into the quiet, remember this: the same forces that lit the first stars still move through you. You are part of the same story that began when time itself was born. Every moment you live is another ripple from that very first moment. The daytime began. Good night.